We will start out by stating the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would ask you to remain standing so we can do a moment of silence for the flag. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we recently had a passing of a former police chief in St. Albans. Clifford Patterson served 35 years on the force, and he passed away last week at the age of 69. He served in all capacities, and his last position was as chief. So I'd like to just take a moment of silence for Clifford Patterson. Thank you. Are there any corrections or changes to the agenda? Yeah, you good? Yeah, Nathan? Three, Nathan? Okay, so we'll move on to general public comment on non-agenda matters within the council's purview. So, if you have a comment, I'd ask that you just please come up here and introduce yourself and sit at the table. And then we'll move to Zoom after that. Anyone in the audience? Any comments? Oh. Okay. Moving, anyone on Zoom, please raise your hand if you have any public comments. I see one for Jeffrey Nelson. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hi, folks. I just wanted to, I know you've got a full agenda tonight, looks like, but I wanted to encourage you to do a local ordinance for mask wearing. Obviously, like every other St. Albans person, we're hoping we'd be in a different place other than mid-40s for a case count and full hospital bed, especially before the holiday season. But unfortunately, I think as the responsible and just forthright thing to do is to have it so that people that want to shop and enjoy themselves and survive the holidays, I hope that you'll consider making that. And I realize it's making it a monthly renewal, it sounds like, is the way to go with that currently. And I would support that as well. And I'm not sure what the transition from pandemic to endemic looks like, and as much as, but it ain't mid 400s on case count and full ICU beds, that's for sure. So I hope you folks will consider that, and hope that the holidays find us all safe.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Anyone else on Robin?
Hi, I don't have anything long to say, but I share Jeffrey's sentiments 100%. I fully support a mask mandate, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom? Seeing none, we're going to move on to item number 4, which is the police department policy approval. Sorry about that. Number 3, come on up. So number 3, police advisory board presentation and budget request. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share one of the recommendations that came up for our police advisory board. So my name is Linda White. I chair the police advisory board currently, and in the last year we had a few focal areas that I'll just gloss over quickly before we get to our ask. We did some focus and work in the earlier stages with assisting the police department in hiring and recommendations. One of our board members actually sat on the team to interview a few potential officers, and another focal point that we have is looking at data and collecting community feedback. So We've put a few different avenues of collecting that. We have a police advisory board email address that we get information on, as well as a survey that's gone out. And then also the other piece that kind of intersects with the data is community partnerships. We did a big focus on that as well, so we could learn more about what our community partners have to offer, what we could do to build some partnerships and fill in some gaps. And then we do have some board members that attended the Franklin Grand Isle Community Partnership. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that. That's been going on for many years. It was previously funded by the Agency of Human Services until about 2008. The funding was disbanded, and to date, Franklin Grand Isle is the only location in the state of Vermont that consistently holds those meetings and has continued regardless of the lack of the funding. And I am on the executive lead team for that. So we ended up scheduling our police advisory board to present, so to speak. We call it scheduling presenters in the month of November, but it wasn't as much of a presentation as it was an opportunity to listen, learn, and ask questions. So towards the tail end of our work with the police advisory board, which is going to kind of bring a little bit of what the memo and our ask for, is that we are obviously aware that there's an embedded crisis worker with law enforcement, and that position has been serving a critical purpose in our community. And we also know that there's a need for more of that work. So we have tonight Chief Lamont and Sam Weber with NCSS. She's an embedded crisis worker at St. Albans Police Department. She's here as well, and I want to give them a chance to talk just a little bit about what that looks like. But they did some education for our community partnership and also for our board members and any public that was that had attended that meeting, so people can get a better feel of what that work looks like, how it intersects with law enforcement. And a big piece of that, why it's so powerful in this community, is that when I look from substance use and mental health work, we've got workers available in the community, but timing is of the essence in a lot of cases, especially when it's an emergency. And there's de-escalation. People who are trained well for that, when you have a licensed mental health worker, substance use worker, they're well trained in how to respond to some of the calls. Therefore, when someone like Sam is on the call, not only is it an opportunity to avoid any kind of escalation, but it's also an opportunity to get that person connected to services. Whereas if they're just given a business card from a law enforcement officer, if they're responding to a call, oftentimes people aren't as motivated the next day or 2 days later to make that call and follow up. So there's a lot of data that supports the efficacy of having the appropriate people at the appropriate places when these crisis calls happen. So I don't know how you want to work this, but I'd love for Chief Lamont and Sam to give just a brief overview of the work that Sam does, just to give you a feel for what they shared with our partners in our community.
Sure. Sam, you want to go first?
No.
Well, do you want to go first?
Whatever you want me to do. I'll sit up here, if that's okay.
Thanks for joining us, Chief.
Good evening, everybody. So, I have quite a bit of experience in this, only from my private workplace and then here. This is a vital tool that we have. I call it a tool only because it's another resource we use. It's more of a partnership and collaboration. I've said this before, I'll say it again. We're not experts in anything we do. I don't think many people are, but if you're not an expert, then what do you rely on? You rely on other experts to bring with you, and that's what Sam brings to the scene. So, whenever we respond to something as law enforcement officers, it's typically a crisis. People don't call us when something's good. So we rely on what training we have to deal with people that are in crisis. We do the best we can with what we have, and generally it works out okay. The stories you hear about typically are stories that didn't go so well. When Sam goes, or anybody else with this training, when I were with Sam, they bring the ability to bring their training that's much higher than ours in dealing with people that are in crisis at the time. And they also bring the ability to hook them up with services that we don't have. So if we go to somebody that's in crisis, even if the best scenario works out, we de-escalate them, things are calm, but if somebody that's had a crisis before and going to likely have a crisis again, we are in a position where, as Melinda said, we might give them a card and ask them to follow up with help with NCSS or the hospital. Sam can talk them through the treatment plan that's going to be put in place from the time we are there. And that's instrumental in not getting return calls to that house, them getting the crisis help they need, and the help down the road. And it stops us not only having to go there again, but likely get some help they needed for a long time before we can follow. The goal here is to get that help to the community as quickly as they can get it. and get them to where they need to be, get us out of the world. And it just works out great for us. NCSS has been great through these years with paying for this. They haven't asked for any funding. The new program that came down through the legislature, I'm sure you're well aware, that the 10 positions that went throughout the state are funded now. Hers is not, so NCSS is still funding that bill. It's been terrific. We were the pilot in the state with the Eric's up here. It was great, took all these years to get all these other positions, but we would like more. Sam can only work so many hours in a shift and so many hours in a week, and she's getting called in her off time, weekends and everything else, and she's obliging us by helping out with the phone and whatnot, but there has to be a limit how many hours she can work. More positions would be better, that's what we're looking for. Just not really good. That's what we got.
Sam, you're an NCSS employee?
Yes.
And we used to have, or were they both, I think there used to be two, and were they both NCSS?
There's always been one. Before Sam, there was Josh. He was prior to Sam. When he left, Sam took his position, and GSP has one as well.
And so timing on this, if the budget gets passed, the funds aren't made available until July 1, right? So this puts this out. I guess you could be interviewing in the meantime, but is that, the impact is that it's not going to be immediate, right?
It sounds like we'd be paying someone, paying NCSS or someone else to, organization to provide someone. It wouldn't be a city employee, would it?
It likely would not be a city employee. We likely would be funding it through an MOU with a provider such as NCSS. We probably would need to build it into the FY23 budget. Perhaps we could start it earlier if we could find some funds. But given the recruiting climate and the niche that we're looking for here, 6 months isn't crazy for any position right now. So,
That was going to be my other concern, because NCSS is short significant number of employees, right? And,
yeah.
Howard had to do.
It is a niche. I mean, we were very fortunate to find the one we had the GSP when we did. Extremely fortunate to find Sam. I also have a lot of friends in the state world that are filling those current other positions that are out there, and some of them have interviewed several not found fits, and some have found persons in those geographic areas, but it's not as quick to find as we think it would be.
Sam, you want to add anything?
I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure I have anything more to add than what the chief said.
Can I ask Sam, how do you structure it? Is it mostly reactive? Do you have certain hours of the day? How do you?
So the way that I have it structured right now is I'm physically at the police department Monday through Thursday from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. So those are the only hours that I'm physically present. A lot of it is reactive. I'm frequently just out in the cruisers with the officers, and we respond as a team, and I'm right there responding with their initial call as well. But I do have the flexibility to do a lot of other things. So I follow people. I do essentially almost like crisis case management sometimes, if that's what's necessary to make sure people are appropriately connected with services. I've definitely built enough rapport with community members that sometimes they just call me directly knowing that I'm there and say, hey, I'm having this hard time, can you come here? And as long as we know that there's not any reason to think there's any safety risks, then the chief has given me the ability to sort of move around that way if that's helpful for the community members. So I kind of get to do whatever the situation calls for.
Are you able? I suspect one of the challenges in managing it for yourself is how do you not work 24 hours a day, right? And so, recognizing that, at the same time, the peak demand is probably in crisis hours, right? Which is not business hours, right? So, how do you manage that, and what would be your advice as you look at should we add a second person who's like, low person on the totem pole and works nights and you support them, or?
I don't think we've gotten to that level of minutia yet. I think it really depends on, as this gets built, what pieces can get put into play and how they fit. We're definitely talking about fluctuating schedules. We'd be happy to, do back and forth depending on what the other individual's scheduling would look like. Part of NCSS's concern is the crisis team, the core crisis team that I'm a part of, is also there only during business hours. So if this other person came in and was new and we're working nights and weekends, then they really are sort of an island of one versus having an entire team to support them during the day. So likely it probably would be me that might need to shift my hours so that they have more support, at least initially. We've talked about a couple of different ways to do that, but we don't have a for sure model yet.
So just follow up on that. What happens on Saturday and Friday night and Saturday?
It rolls right back to the days before we had Sam, or any time that Sam's off, or any other agency that doesn't have a Sam, we go back to the on-call crisis person. NCSS has a person stationed right against the phone, whether that the emergency room waiting there because they know so many calls are going to come and result in kind of with the transport there. The problem is, the issue with that is not a problem. The issue with that is that you're one of several police agencies relying on that one person taking multiple calls, and they aren't responsive to you, so now you're at that position where you have to talk that, if that person needs to see somebody, you're at that position of talking them into going with you to the hospital, convincing that person to go to the hospital. It's a lot easier, in my experience, for somebody in Sam's position talking them to receive the message.
Jamie, do you have anything to share as co-chair?
From the hospital's perspective,
Okay, hello. Yes, I'm Jamie. I'm the vice chair of the Police Advisory Board, and just to sort of loop this all back around to why we were formed in the first place, part of what the community has asked us for is, how do we limit the number of escalating events where police have to use force, where they're put in a position where they might have to use force, and really respond to the situation at hand. So that is a huge part of what we've learned over the last several weeks and months that Sam's role plays. And so asking for this additional position and keeping it at a level so that that sort of level of detail can be worked out from our perspective is about meeting that need in the community and also trying to address some of those concerns that were brought forward to start our committee in the first place. And so, I think Sam and Chief have both highlighted where these events have really been well managed when they could have taken a different turn. Yes, working in the hospital, recognizing that midnight in the ED is a tough time for someone to be there. They might not get the support they need for another 24 hours, and so as much as we can offer up front really can make a difference to the outcomes for folks. So that is all part of our rationale for making this request.
And is your committee aware of the timeline?
We are aware of it, yeah. The big reason too, I don't know if you did have a chance to see the memo that we had submitted, but the big reason we wanted to get it now is that we've had this past year to focus on it, knowing that the budget was going to be coming up. And also, it's going to take time to recruit the right person. One thing that we did think would be important, so we're looking for one FTE employee, but to have that person employed through one of the two designated agencies, whether it's NCSS or Howard Center, and because there's already that relationship with NCSS, that would be kind of the logical assumption, but that doesn't mean it has to be. And we didn't want to put a lot of detail in the position because the reality is it's going to come down to the two organizations working together to define, well, what's going to be the best schedule, what is it going to look like. The key piece to remember by having the person employed by that designated agency as opposed to the city is because there's a supervision structure that's critical to make sure people are getting the training, they're getting the supervision in doing that kind of work, and it takes away the authenticity of the service being provided if it's adopted by a different organization without the structure to do that supervision. So similar to other embedded positions, Turning Point has recovery coaches being embedded in the emergency department. They're not employed by the hospital because the service is a recovery center service. So we didn't get in a lot of the detail of the weeds of what it would look like, but what we do know is that we need more than one position where we're going to start somewhere. There's a huge need for this, and it's not just locally. This is across the state, and we've seen it, and it's taken years to kind of get the state to recognize it, and now it's implementing it more. And the reality is, there's really a need for that 24/7 if you want to be as effective as possible. We also know that there's just not unlimited funds out there and unlimited people able to do the work. It takes a special person to do this kind of work. to have the relationship with the individuals that they encounter, as well as the relationship with the law enforcement officers and the community partners. So it takes a special person, but they're definitely out there. So I don't think that it's a scary idea to think of, July of next year, we wouldn't be able to start really going live. Well, it's going to take some time to get the position formed, to get the communication going, to do the hiring and recruit people. And same with the schedule. I mean, it would be wonderful if somebody had, especially the weekends and the evenings and the nights, but like Sam said, they can work out those details. One thing that we know as a police advisory board from the many different topics that we've talked about over this last year, we've heard a lot of feedback with a lot of different perspectives on different topics, and it's been a great learning experience. When it comes to this one specific topic, I'll speak for myself. I haven't had any member of the community that I've talked to, any community partner, or any board member who thought this would be a bad idea. So it's the one thing that collectively I've heard 100% support for, because our community, our partners, our teams know that it's really needed. So that's why we put in the ask today.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Do you have a rough estimate on how much, how much of, this grant would be, how much we need to have this? Is it
So
$100,000? Is it $300,000?
it's I really don't want to pretend like I know what that would be, but I'm pretty confident it wouldn't be around the $300,000 range. So I think you'd be looking more, between maybe 80 and 120 if you're looking at fringe and overhead and whatnot. That would be my guesstimation.
For what, one FTE?
One FTE.
Can I ask what the level of clinical experience, maybe this is a question for Sandra, like what the level of clinical experience somebody would need to be effectively, adding that person in this position?
I think it would depend on the responsibilities. Some of the different models I've seen across the state, sometimes there's one person who's got more of a clinical lens and somebody who does maybe more of the follow-up and case management. So there are ways to have varying levels of education. I have a master's degree, so part of having it be like the right person is once you get to the point where you're at that higher level of education and you're, licensed and that sort of thing, it definitely becomes a harder position to start talking about nights and weekends, that sort of thing.
So you're like LICSW? Or?
My master's degree is in psychology.
And that was something we actually talked about too, to not make more barriers in getting an appropriate person in that position, was to not necessarily require a specific education per se, but appropriate education in both mental health and substance use. Because that's the other challenge is, one blessing with Sam is that she's well trained in both mental health and substance use. So whether there's people employed by Howard Center or NCSS that are trained in both, and then some might be trained only in the mental health, it's NCSS and substance use. But in that position, it's really important to have somebody who's got training in both. It doesn't mean it has to be full-on licensure. And that's the key, is that sometimes putting such high requirements on the college education makes people miss out on good individuals who'd be good for the work. So that, and again, I think that that's where, like Sam said, we're talking about, well, what about case management? You want somebody who knows what the resources are so they can do a quick referral and help people follow up. But I think more than anything, somebody who's got that training in both substance use and mental health. I know there's some other areas of the state that the person might have very good mental health training, but they're not as well versed in the substance use. And in those areas, they have recovery coaches embedded with law enforcement, which is something we won't go into for tonight, but it's just to say having somebody who's either trained in both or having two positions, one of each, is really important. So we're just blessed that Sam's got the training in both to know how to support and refer.
Any other questions from the council?
Chief, where are we with everybody else?
Meaning,
This type of position?
this,
This
you
type-
mean within the department?
No, within the state.
Oh, so the other, you're talking the barracks. So every barracks was given one position to get. So every barracks is going to have one embedded worker whenever they hire. They've been given the money. The last I knew, there was 2 barracks that hadn't yet picked the person, but every barracks had one in place.
What about municipalities?
Rutland, St. Johnsbury, I think there's a few popping up. There's probably 10, 8, 10 maybe.
Talking about it, I don't think anybody has yet operationalized it.
No, not many at all. The only one, Rutland had it right around the same time as St. Albans Police Department before I got here. St. Johnsbury, the others, most of them are on the, they're not embedded in it yet at all.
And I don't think anybody's put municipal funds into it.
No, that I don't know. The first group that's going to put in, as they're not even, the state police are not municipal funds.
those are state, those, might be no better than I, those are legislative functions.
The work that Sam does, it might seem reactive, but us moving forward with this is very proactive. Especially we talk about how much one prisoner costs in our correctional facility here. If you can stop one or two people from doing something stupid that puts them in jail because they're having some kind of mental crisis, you've already gained that back. So not counting the life lost or mother or dad in jail or things like that. So that's important.
Potentially that question.
I'm just wondering, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but is Sam interested in that position if it were to become municipal kind of operation like we're talking about, or is it too soon to ask something like that?
We just happen to have a contract right here, so.
That's not what I'm here for.
I think we want to expand it. We want to replicate Sam, more than recruiter.
I would be happy to help in that recruiting process, though, for sure.
Any other questions? Melinda or Jamie, I think one or two other from your committee are here.
Yeah, so, Chris Lucas is also on our police advisory board, and has been part of all those conversations, including when we did some focus points with the community partnership. She's been key in that. Also, and of course, Jamie Pinkham, our vice chair. And that'll be a small segue that we also, as a board, have gone through policies and procedures, and I know there's 6 that are going to be in front of you tonight, and Jamie has done extensive work on that as well as Chris.
Thank you for your service, everyone. Appreciate it. Just to give a, so it will go to finance, and finance will discuss this.
Well, it'll be presented by staff and then go to finance.
So it will be discussed, and I think our timeline was public meeting January 3rd.
It's coming up. Yeah.
So that will be the next step for us.
Great.
So thanks for my
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Chief, I guess if you want to stay up here, we're going to go to item number 4, which is the police department policy approval. First of all, I think we have 6.
Thank you.
Is there an opportunity for public comment on that or questions?
On the position we get that?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, so one of my questions is I'm on the same page with some other folks of a very strong interest in having this kind of role within the community. I would say that it's not unequivocal that everyone has the same perspective of what that means in regards to funding it. And there's a large wave across the state of Vermont, within Franklin County, St. Albans, and across the nation that it's actually about the redistribution and reallocation of police department resources. If the goal of this position is to actually de-escalate situations and reduce the number of situations in which police force are present, then I would imagine this is about the redistribution of resources. So my question would be, in the process of considering whether or not financial resources from the city would go there, would be to ask, with one of the largest budgets of police departments in the state of Vermont, if there has been a consideration of the redistribution of FTEs for police officers to fund this position.
My answer to that, Reese, would be no, this time. But I'm not involved in the budget discussions. So there's a separate committee that's involved in that is just beginning to undertake the budget.
That budget gets presented to us, Reese, and then we'll look at whether, and the chief will appear at that budget hearing, and we just look at whether he can reallocate funds within the department to fund the position.
Well, I'm also curious as to maybe why it wasn't a question of the actual ask as well. I mean, I just from doing budgetary stuff and people asking for grant money, the question would also be, what have you done within your budget to actually try to come up with this? Or what have you considered and why it didn't?
And this will be the first time that gets presented.
Okay, great.
To the budget, yeah, the committee.
I might also say that to the comment about the size of the budget, there was a major change in the level of service and coverage in between the previous year's budget and the one that we're currently in. So as it was reported in Vermont Digger, for instance, our budget was actually for more municipalities than we now currently serve with the St. Albans Police Department, which made it look a lot bigger per capita than it actually is currently today. So we've already seen a major change in the police budget. And at the same time this year, we had capital funds going in to do the fit up of a new police station. That's a one-year thing. And I think when we look at the ongoing base funding for our police services, it's very in line with similar communities. And so the question really is for us, you know, and when we get that budget presented to us, it's like, what is the appropriate level of staffing? So I think the question isn't so much about, are we going to cut some position to fund this other position? It's about what is the appropriate level of staffing that we need to fund, and what are the resources we have, given that we're in a time where year over year, for the last couple of years, we've had major changes in our police department.
Oh yeah, I hear that. My question is, or my thought is, it should be considered as one of the options that an FTE internally be reallocated. If that's not the end result, then it's not the end result. That's what people within budgeting processes around staff do, particularly if this role is to actually reduce the amount of police presence or to reduce the escalation or to reduce the transportation, right? Like if you're reducing the responsibilities of another role within your department, you would consider what does that mean in terms of finances and staffing. So I hear you, and my perspective is what I shared.
And just so you're aware, it's Jim Pelkey, Mike McCarthy, and myself on the budget committee.
Good, thanks.
Any other comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, which was the police department policy approval. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. There's a lot of them, so I'll go through them kind of quickly, but I'll stop after each one. Start off by thanking Melinda and the Advisory Board, and specifically Jamie and her team, because they're the ones who spent time on the policies. These are ones that were ongoing for a while, but they weren't quite as pressing as the earlier ones that you saw earlier in the year. Every one of these are CALEA based. We wrote them, sent them over to Jamie's crew. They made some adjustments and some suggestions. None of their suggestions were not put into these. They're all taken. They're minor as well, because again, these are updated CALEA policies. So I'll just do them in the order of which Kristen and I put them on here. Arrest and investigatory stops. We just want to get something out there. I apologize, I don't know if this one was, I don't think this one existed on the books prior to this. It's kind of redundant though, because there was an investigatory policy that existed at P.E.G, but we didn't have one, I don't think that was specific to the two. So the policy we wanted to read that, generally speaking, the policy of St. Albans Police Department is to treat every individual, every personal contact and case investigation with consistency and equity regardless of an individual's demographics, to include but not limited to race, ethnic background, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, age, disability, cultural group, political status, except when the characteristics are part of the specific subject description. So that was one of the big reasons we wrote this. We reiterated some age-old definitions that come straight out of the academy that were in use when I went through the 90s and are still in use today. We just want to highlight those again for everybody. So again, some of us haven't been through the academy in 20 plus years, so it's not a bad idea to put those back out there again. We wanted to highlight what the difference was between investigatory detention versus custody. Again, some of us haven't been through the academy in 20-something years. And reiterate what reasonable suspicion is. Sounds, especially to a lawyer, it sounds very common, but we want to reiterate what reasonable suspicion was versus probable cause. So that's kind of the highlights of that policy. Any questions on that one? It's pretty basic, like I said, but I wanted to have something that really highlighted our policy to treat everybody non-biased. We have a fair and impartial policy, as you all know, but I wanted to have that line in there.
I think we're going to move on the slate, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, second one, just again going in order. Harassment and discrimination, LGBTQ specific. This one, according to the CALEA, I get most of my policies off the same site, which is a CALEA website for policies. This one, I believe, has only been on a couple of years, at least according to this website that gives them out to us, which is the International Chiefs of Police Association CALEA policy. So again, It's very similar to a standard business workplace harassment policy, except it shifts over to the agency, department dealing with the public, rather than your own workplace employees. The purpose of this policy, relationship between law enforcement groups such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, LGBTQ communities have been fraught with suspicion and misunderstanding. Keeping with the mission statement, core values of the Salem Police Department, it's important for us to foster partnerships that address directly or indirectly bigotry and ignorance. In the delivery of needed law enforcement and police services, we must work together to develop the atmosphere of understanding, respect, and trust within our community. This policy establishes guidelines and operating procedures for all personnel when interacting with the LGBTQ community, including transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming individuals. But this policy gives some definitions. This policy talks about how to ask somebody how they'd like to be referred to. This policy also talks about how to, if you're going to lodge somebody, because that does happen, that transgender, it outlines how that happens, because there's difference between how somebody might identify and how that's dealt with at the correctional center level. That's not up to us, that's up to the correctional center. And it talks about how you will call the correctional center and advise them you have to use their government issued ID, and that decides what jail they're going to, because jails are male or they are female. That's the only way they look at it, is the government ID. And that outlines how they do that. Any questions on that one? It's actually kind of questionable for the officer at 2 o'clock in the morning. Investigations. This one.
A quick question. So we now actually do have the gender as an X available.
Yes.
On Vermont issued government IDs, right?
Yes. We do. And it's funny you said, because I asked the superintendent down here, that's how it's being handled. He said you're still using a government issued ID. So if we have that come up an ID, then they're going to have to make a decision. The jail's going to have to. Investigations. Policy is a policy of Salem Police Department to treat every individual, every personal contact case investigation with consistency, with equity, regardless of the individual's demographics. And not limited to race, ethnic background, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, age, disability, culture, political status, except when such characteristics are part of the subject description. So that's, again, the idea is to get that in the investigation part of this so that there's no bias involved in investigations. We talk about car stops, license status. So this actually came up as a complaint we got from the public. So some policies do, unfortunately, as every business in the world, policies often are written because somebody made a complaint and it made sense that policies should be put in place. If you recognize somebody that's driving there under suspension, so you stop them, or they might not be under suspension anymore. Sometimes people get reinstated in the time that you last stopped them. So this policy just says that just because somebody was under the last time you stopped them, even if it was yesterday, you'll be running their license before they stop them again based on what you used to know. It's also written here that arrest warrants the same way. If somebody was wanted yesterday, you see them today, you're going to run them again to make sure they're still wanted before you deal with that warrant. Because again, sometimes people clear warrants from a 24-hour period. And that's why that policy was written. Any questions? I'm sorry, these are cheap classes, so I keep taking them off. I don't know how that works. Anything? That's investigation. Sexual harassment workplace. This one is definitely a standard policy. I'm sure there's one at probably right here at City Hall, every workplace I've ever worked. This one, the only reason I wrote this one is I wanted to update this one, so I did, is the last one I looked at, we had at the P.E.G, but didn't have Tom Leitz's name in it for HR and didn't have city manager Don McLeod's name in it. So I just want to make sure that their names are in there. But this is a regular sexual harassment in the workplace policy. It tells you what defines sexual harassment, how to report it, again, with Mr. Leitz and Mr. Cloud's names in here. As far as I can read through some of it, it's a standard workplace sexual harassment policy. And it does open up with, it does have a line that there be no bias treatment of any individual, regardless of any traits. And that's why that policy is written as an update. The last one that she has on the list, transporting and searching prisoners. It starts off with the same line of reading. We'll be treating everybody with the same without any bias. That was the purpose of this one. And this one is mostly written, this policy, so I'm sure I wrote some notes so we'll be able to quickly do this. Mostly written to talk about search in our vehicles. What we found was different from here to the VSP was that we didn't have this policy in place dictating that the officers will search the cruisers after each transport. And the reason for that is people are pretty ingenious about taking stuff off their bodies that you may have missed during the search that you should have done before you put them in the car, and hiding them in the cruiser, and then they're found a week later and we don't know where it came from. It's kind of hard to, if it's a chargeable crime, to charge somebody or even blame somebody, or if it's a dangerous weapon, know where it came from. So just as dictates that you will search your cruiser after you transport somebody, the same as the cells. There'll be a search of the cruiser after every transport. It talks about how we're gonna, at the detention facility, we're gonna lock up your weapon before taking them out of your cruiser to get them into the detention facility. And this reiterates again, transporting LGBTQ or transgender, how that's gonna work, which facility you're gonna go to, the phone calls you're gonna make sure you're going to the right facility, because there have been issues, not with us yet, but they've shown that one gentleman turned away. And what you're doing is escape from custody, who you're gonna contact if somebody escapes while they're in your custody. And that was a highlight of that policy. And the last one she has listed on here is use of force policy, and as you all know, we talked about this in a bunch of times, but it's a state use of force policy. It went into effect October 1st. We can't make any changes or edits to it, but we did adopt it October 1st. I just haven't seen any of you since then. And that is it. Every department in the state did adopt that policy finally, so we're all good.
Can you repeat that number?
Every department in the state did in fact adopt the use of force policy. There was one holdout last I knew, but every department adopted it.
And you had to have done it by...
October 1st, and we did it October 1st. There was one holdout. There was quite a bit of training. Every officer had to have at least 4 hours of training specific to that, so we didn't get to the middle of September, so it kind of puts you under a crunch to get everybody through. If you're a bigger department, I can imagine we're a little hard scheduling wise.
So I noticed on all these, it talks about revised with today's or a certain date.
I'm sorry, talks about what?
All of these being revised.
Yes.
So all of these were existing policies, there was nothing...
Yes, all of them were existing or very similar to existing policies. I may have changed the name of them, but yes, they're all existing. P.E.G had 100 policies like up there. Most of them were made in the early 90s. So we're slowly knocking them off and updating them all. But I wouldn't say, I don't think I actually made anything from actual scratch or into pieces of parts or something.
So do we still have our consultants under contract, or
Yes.
are they working with you on these?
Not all of them. If anything is, any of them are questionable in any way, they haven't had a chance to look at them, yes. The Clio, everything I've used has been Clio at this point, so I'm not overly concerned about them being out of bounds in any way. But there are a couple right now that Nick has in his hands.
The P.E.G is...
Every one of them. The only ones that we made a deal, kind of, lack of a better term, Jamie and I, that ones that have nothing to do with the public are not being put in front of them. For example, we have an appearance policy that just went out. It just simply states how they're going to wear their uniform. Jamie did not see that one because it has nothing to do with, it does not have anything to do with the public. The other one, there's two, that's all we've done. That one and the gym policy. We have a small gym at our PD, nothing to do with anybody but who, and it just says when they can use it, how they can use it. Those things go in front of the PD. Just so we don't bottom down with ones that just don't. And James spent enough time on these policies. But I don't suspect there'll be, at the end of this, I don't know if there'll be 10 of those like that. I can't imagine. But every other one they see.
And the only suggestion I would have is at the end of them, have a revision history, just so you can know, just so you know when it was updated and why it was updated, or what was updated, and it's just nice to, we do that at work, it's just really nice to see what was added or subtracted or changed.
So I have a log as well that shows when we did these, when they went in front of the board, in front of you, and then actually adopted. And I'll update that as they go, but that's a good idea to keep the initial.
Comments?
Public comment?
Yeah, anyone on the council, anyone? Any other questions? Public? Please?
Hi, everyone. So one of the points of feedback I have is on the harassment and discrimination of LGBTQ specifications. It looks like the policy is actually just about trans, intersex, and gender non-conforming individuals, so it doesn't apply unless they are also trans, intersex, or gender non-conforming to the LGB and Q part of that. So it's a little confusing to go through and look, how does this apply to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer people when it's really just focused on trans, intersex, and gender non-conforming individuals. So either add those that are on there, or I would suggest taking them out of the acronym because it is misleading to think it's about more of the acronym when it's really just looking at one aspect of it. The other thing that I found slightly confusing is it's on my page 34 of the packet, but in your packet, it is on page 3 of the sexual harassment workplace policy. Under G, same-sex sexual harassment, it looks like the definition is conflating that sexual harassment can be perpetrated by anyone of any sex with harassment that targets people on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. So I would actually suggest revising that definition to clarify that yes, anyone of any sex or gender can be a harasser, can experience harassment, but there is specific targeted harassment on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, that both of those are conflated in this definition and it doesn't make sense.
Wait, I didn't catch, I caught what you said, I just catch where you caught that. What
So it's page 3 of the sexual harassment workplace under G.
Gotcha, okay, thank you. Oh yeah, I get it now, seems pretty good. You talk faster than I do.
Anyone else in the public? Larry?
Yeah, so there's some concerning things under the investigations thing. So like section B, the investigatory detentions, for instance, the suspect's clothing bulges in a manner that suggests they're carrying a weapon. Well, we're a concealed carry state, correct? So someone could be carrying a weapon legally. Would they then be able to be stopped for legally carrying a weapon?
No, that means if you're an investigatory stop or something else and that weapon is enough to, that is a reason you can pat them down, yes.
In justifying the stop, the officer must be able to point to specific articulable facts that, when taken together with rational inferences, reasonably warrant the stop. Such facts include, but are not limited to, the following. Number 3 on that, the suspect's clothing bulges in a manner that suggests they're carrying a weapon.
Yes, with articulate reasons for the stop. You're not just going to walk down the street and stop somebody for a weapon. There has to be something more for the reason for the stop. Somebody can be walking down the street carrying a rifle on their back right now, and there's no reason for us to stop them, although we do get calls for that all the time. Especially during hunting season.
Right.
You know what I mean? People call for those calls. We actually have to talk people off that all the time that say if somebody walking, just specifically Route 7 or 105, people walking with a rifle, like, you can do that no more.
Right.
You can't. Doesn't mean we're going to run up and stop them. However, if somebody is carrying that same bulge in their jacket in front of BFA, I'm suspecting we would send somebody right up there to have a conversation with them.
So walking
You have
in front of
to take in the full
the
circumstances.
constitutional, the right to carry a weapon ends in front of BFA.
If you're in the school zone, yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. It's the circumstances of the totality of the circumstances.
That seems like it could be.
But guns are one are definitely touchy.
Melinda, anything to share? Let me say on behalf of the council, thank the advisory commission for all your work. We know you put in a lot of time and effort, so thank you very much. We definitely appreciate that. So, any comments on Zoom? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to accept the slate of policies as presented with a couple minor changes. Motion by Chad, seconded by Mike. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Steve, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Do we have Mr. Dito here?
No, I'll be presenting.
There's a little bit of a lot of it. It's more internal focus, right? There are public registrations, whatever, But I think, to be honest, not like,
No, well, you might have one of the other rules.
it's not like a zoning ordinance,
Yeah.
right? The first policies for the city are on the website.
These are dealing with the public, that's who you can ask. They're not like inter-department policies or anything like that. Specifically for working with the public. Just seems like those should be on the website or published somewhere.
Maybe a list of them that says they're available for public review, without having to go into every
You know,
page of it. Somewhere on the department website saying, you know, policies A, B, C are available for public review.
You want to think about that a little bit?
Yep.
Okay, we'll move on to the St. Albans Museum.
Yeah, sorry, slight change to the agenda. I'm Lisa Evans, Executive Director of the museum. On the agenda, it does say that this would be by our president, co-president, and treasurer, which is Janet, Brendan, and Joe, who did help write this proposal draft. So I hope that you all have a copy in front of you of our proposal. I do want to start, I know you didn't have a chance really to have this on hand before today's meeting, so I want to go over it with you before getting to the proposal. It's really kind of a rundown of a fact sheet. So, by the numbers, as many of you already know, SAM, the St. Albans Museum, was closed to the public from the end of the year of 2019 until July 2nd, 2021. In July of 2020, shortly after the pandemic started, the American Alliance of Museums warned that 1 out of every 3 museums in the U.S. would likely close their doors for good as a result of the pandemic. We are fortunate enough to avoid that outcome, but I have to say that we are unfortunately hanging by a thread at this point. SAM's annual operational budget is $175,000. Now that is the minimum necessary for us to keep the building open. That's our utilities, lights, water, electricity, insurance, and 1 part-time staff member. So yes, the pandemic has greatly hindered our income, but unfortunately, we've actually been at a deficit further back than the March 2020 shutdowns, largely in part to the rising cost of maintaining the aging building. Now, SAM did qualify for the PPP loans in both years, but those loans were based on staff payroll, not our entire budget. And staff payroll, again, as of right now, is 1 part-time staff member. Now, in 2021, in addition to other grants, we did apply for and received 2 grants to conduct building and collection storage assessments, which we found the necessary repairs and upgrades is estimated to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, some of those repairs could not wait without risking further damage in the near future. The most recent example being the north chimney of the building, which we found to be leaking water onto the blister stage through the ceiling, and it required immediate attention before the entire ceiling collapsed. So we had to take into account the original cost estimate of $35,000, but we didn't have time to apply for grants. We didn't have time to conduct major fundraisers. We had to spend directly from our operational budget to have it fixed. Now, fortunately, we did see it completed just recently in November, and it was $20,000, which was $15,000 less than the original estimate. Now, we've done everything we can to cut down our costs. One such major change as part of this effort was shifting from a full-time executive director to part-time, which did provide us an annual savings of $20,000. But unfortunately, that change has come at an even greater cost. Without the proper full-time staff member on payroll, we're forced to reduce the number of events and programs that we've been able to deliver, which I know that many of you are aware of. We held a Halloween trick-or-treat night. We helped hold the New Year's event in the Bliss Room. Obviously, there are changes because of the pandemic as well, but you need to understand that, again, with 1 part-time staffer, We just cannot pull off the same amount of programs and events. Now, still there is some good news. So in 2021, during our shortened season, SAM welcomed visitors not only from the local area, but also from 22 other states. 22 states during the 3 days a week that we were open to the public, and only the 2 full months that we were open for the season. During a pandemic, when people were traveling less, we still saw people come to us from 22 different states on top of the local St. Albans area. This alone demonstrates how valuable the museum is to the city's tourism industry and bringing money into the local economy. Imagine if we were open more days a week and more months a year. Currently, we have 25 active volunteers who do everything from administration assistance to guiding tours, to maintaining the building, to maintaining our collections, conducting research, designing exhibits. They worked over 3,450 hours in 2021 alone. Just for context, in 2021, the Vermont minimum wage is $11.75. That's over $40,000 worth of labor in a muted pandemic year when we had way less volunteer hours than our average non-COVID year. And the minimum wage is going up by 80 cents in 2022. I want to be clear that these dedicated and passionate volunteers deserve way more than the minimum wage. The amount of work that they put into that museum, many of our volunteers, this is their life. They love it. Many of them have been with us for decades, and we would not survive without them. Now, our volunteers believe in SAM so much that they often pay for supplies out of their own pocket when the money cannot be found in our budget. I, for example, only recently learned that our security system was actually basically donated by our volunteers. They all kind of chipped in, or a couple of them chipped in to have it installed. So additionally, SAM had a much needed boost when we received over $40,000 from just 2 private donors alone in 2021. While we're clearly fortunate to have such strong and able supporters, this is in no way a sustainable financial model. I want to go over the ongoing challenges. As I mentioned, our nearly fully volunteer staff is not sufficient to carry out the number of programs, events, and day-to-day activities of the museum. I briefly mentioned how important SAM is to the St. Albans tourism industry, but we can't fully participate the way we would like to with our current staffing and building concerns. Primarily being that the building lacks heating, cooling, as well as safe air ventilation. We've had to turn people away due to excessive heat. We're closed by fall due to excessive cold, and we cannot safely hold public functions in our blister venue space without proper airflow. Again, I want to stress that, it is somewhat obvious that things would be a little bit muted right now because of the pandemic, but these are ongoing issues that have been happening for years. These aren't all new. As I mentioned, the historic circa 1861 Civil War era building is deteriorating and in dire need of special repairs from the ground up. The hundreds of thousands of items in the museum collection currently reside in improper and unsafe collection storage areas with no light, temperature, or humidity control, which we honestly can't address without addressing the building conditions at large. Whether local or federal grant opportunities are highly competitive. Many are match grants that require the receiving organization to have funds on hand in order to be awarded additional funding. And as I've already established, we unfortunately don't have a lot of wiggle room in our budget to produce those funds on a regular basis. We do apply for grants. We seek out every opportunity between myself and our trustees and other volunteers. We're constantly looking for grant opportunities. And I assume that many of you know the effort that goes into applying for grants and the competitive nature of them. That in itself could be a full-time job. So it brings me to our proposal. We bring to the council today to request the St. Albans City increase their annual contribution to the St. Albans Museum to $25,000 annually. With additional municipal support, we can do more than maintain. SAM can thrive. It's imperative that the museum receive additional financial and operational support to not only survive through meeting the bare minimum needs. As the only dedicated cultural organization in St. Albans with an established physical domain, we strive to be the epicenter of communal education and enjoyment. I especially want to stress that this is not a handout, it's a leg up. An increase in funds to SAM would be an investment in the St. Albans community. Now, in previous years, the city has apportioned $15,000 annually to SAM. We're especially grateful for the additional $2,500 granted us this past fiscal year, which helped with some of the unexpected expenditures. The city also graciously donated $3,000 to SAM for the creation of the mobile exhibit, which is out in the hallway. So if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend you take a quick look after. And that's called Untold Stories, Unheard Voices. And after it's here at City Hall, it's going to be touring the local schools. So these additional funds were extremely beneficial in allowing us to expand our reach beyond the museum walls to share local history and heritage outside of our seasonal operations. By increasing the allocated funds to the museum to an annual amount of $25,000, we can continue to make similar strides towards improving the museum and meeting our goals. The city's $25,000 annual contribution to SAM will be spent towards routine operations, necessary building repairs, our ongoing efforts for diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, collection management and exhibition, staff expansion, list room community utilization, public events and programming. Now, SAM's ultimate goal is to grow our membership base and increase our revenue through unrestricted year-round admission, programming, and events. As stewards of our local history and heritage, SAM strives to expand its presence in the community as well as creating a welcoming space for the community within the museum. We seek to be fully accessible, inclusionary, and wholly representative of all of St. Albans, past, present, and future. We aspire to inspire curiosity for all ages. We desire the capacity to be environmentally conscious. Through these core initiatives, we aim to demonstrate our value to St. Albans and to grow our financial self-sufficiency through sustainable practices. I also want to mention that transparency is important to us, and we plan to report our income and expenditure through public budget reports each fiscal year, which we have done in the past, but it hasn't been openly advertised. So we do want to plan doing that for each fiscal year, beginning with our 21-22 year, which just began December 1. In the meantime, we can produce a more thorough breakdown of how SAM intends to spend the allotted funds at the city's request. If you'd like to see that, we'd be happy to work a full, thorough budget out for you. So, thanks for your time. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
I have one question. Your annual budget is 175, is that right?
Yeah.
And is that, other than what the city contributes, is that mostly from grants and things like that?
Yeah.
And is that pretty much the same every year?
Roughly. There's kind of an ebb and flow to things depending on the repairs that are necessary on any given year. Also depends on our traffic flow in and out of the building, actually, because that's wear and tear, and cleaning expenditures, those sorts of things. That's all kind of budgeted into that 175, but that is roughly a good average. Yeah.
Your chimney repair that was estimated at 35 but only came in 20, was some of that in kind?
Actually, Janet, I'm sorry, you might know that better.
I couldn't hear, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Was some of the chimney repair, was that in kind service?
Was some of the chimney repair?
Yeah, it cost about half as much of the estimate.
No, it was Joe Luno getting a good estimate. That was really it. Really, he should have charged more, but he ended up, that was the estimate, and that's what we ended up paying.
Does it cost a little thing? 25 instead of 15?
Are there things that the city could do within its staff and infrastructure that could help reduce outside costs that you might have?
You know, the quick answer is possibly, maybe. It really depends on what the city's capabilities are as far as what we need on a given basis. So, I mean, if we're looking at repairs and that sort of thing, you know, we need to bring in contractors. We need to bring in a lot of that outside help, which you're speaking of. You know, if there's any way to help bring down costs from that, that's wonderful. But I guess it would depend on what your capability is in doing that. And maybe hear more, I guess, from the city.
It'd be much more effective just to write a check.
Really?
But I think, you know, one of my observations is your biggest asset right now is also your biggest liability. And the marketplace for performance gathering spaces like the Bliss Auditorium has changed substantially since that space was created. We now have a lot of competition from this auditorium and from Hardak. And, you know, eventually people are going to gather again, but that's a ways off, right? I think you could consider a redevelopment project in the building. Quite honestly, I'd take a look at that top floor, look at converting that into housing, sell the building, get a capital infusion, become a permanent tenant, create a condo, or partner with somebody to put 4 to 6 units upstairs, you know, and all of those costs right now, you've got massive costs just to keep the building open, right? And it's not even open, you know, but if you converted some of that dormant space in the auditorium to housing units, I think you could chip away at it's not mutually exclusive with this budget proposal, right? It's just the idea, you know, back in the day of having the Bliss Auditorium generate revenue to support the operations of the museum. I think that's a lift now, given how the market has changed. The core principle of having a revenue generator, I think, has a lot of legs, but it could be a different type of revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, you're not wrong. It's definitely crossed my own mind about changing that third floor space. It is a beautiful space, and I know that its purpose when it was first renovated was to be, you know, a source of revenue for us. I think that you hit a lot on the nose, actually. However, I would say that our purpose isn't necessarily to make money. Our purpose is to serve the community. Our purpose is to hold our history and heritage and to share that. Our purpose is not to create money generating space. That's not, you know, I think that, and I don't know what's going through the minds of, you know, the museum founders in the 70s and how that transferred over into the 90s and why they decided to open up the Bliss Room as an event space. I don't know how that projection happened or why they went on to that trajectory, but St. Albans doesn't have any other museums. You know, we need somewhere for the community to be able to not only come together, which you're right, maybe a venue is not the right place or the right solution, but it is about sharing our history and the stories of St. Albans. As I mentioned, the volunteers who give their lives to this place, a lot of them went to school there. It means a lot to the community. And if I were to ever revisit, you know, what to do with the Bliss Room, it would be a development project to make that an exhibit space. We need to bring people into the museum. We need to up our membership base. I don't necessarily think that $25,000 right now is enough. I would like to ask for more, but being reasonable. As I said, I think this is a leg up, not a handout. What I want to do is get to a place where we can be open year round, where we can welcome people all year. And quite honestly, I think that we could. You know, I challenge you to think of a time that you went on a vacation and didn't go to a museum, or at least didn't pass one. You know, we are part of the tourism industry, but we currently are not on the same level as other museums, and that is because of a lack of funding. I think we can get to that level. I think, you know, we could, and I'm just spitballing here, but we could potentially convert that third floor space into a children's center. We should bring in a multidisciplinary approach to how people learn about the area, about how they learn about agriculture and, you know, the Civil War. I mean, we have people who visit us from all over the U.S. Civil War buffs who want to come see the St. Albans Museum because, right, the raid happened here. We're big, we're important. And we have a very small section on that. We need to expand it. There are so many things that people want to come here to see. I was not here at the time, but I heard how successful the Civil War reenactment was. That was huge. We drew in like 10,000 people. It was insane is the number that I heard. So I don't know how many of you were around when that happened, but that was thanks to the museum. I mean, yes, we had other players who helped us, but you know, the research, the history piece, all of that is thanks to the museum. We need to capitalize on that. And so I think if we can start here, we can grow. And we can be a place where families want to bring their kids year-round. We can be a place where we hold, you know, children's activities and events, and we can do all sorts of educational, you know, edutainment kind of things. We obviously need a lot of updating. We're not the most high-tech museum right now, but we could be, you know, and we don't need to be. We're a history museum, but we can certainly be a lot more kid-friendly, more family-centric. We can, you know, make it more exciting, but that takes money, and it takes time, and it takes staff. So, you know, I just ask for this small amount to get us started on the right path, to bring all of that together.
Okay. No, I don't think turning the Bliss Auditorium is going to be very community welcoming. So just a heads up on that. The other thing is, I would love to see it as a traveling show. So I don't know, just something from Shelby Museum were to come up here for a few months, or I don't know if you can get anything out of the Smithsonian or something, you know, just some kind of traveling bit come up here just to draw different people. And you know, museums that are really successful to have that piece that draw you back, because it's not the same thing every time. So you guys have started to change it around some of the rooms, so I feel that's really good. My question is, you said you were really impacted by COVID. I mean, is this an opportunity for some ARPA funds? So just my thought, if they're truly impacted by COVID. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess to build on that question, Chad, I wonder, there's significant federal funding specifically for preserving performance spaces and cultural, so I'm just wondering if there's any eligibility for that kind of support, especially to do some of these one-time things that are really about deferred maintenance, and if there's any help we can provide on that front.
The chartered venue grants, we did not qualify for because we don't have permanent seating. That was the only reason why. For some reason, Miller decided to write it that way, so we tried to qualify that and we did not. So the grants are very limited and very competitive and small.
It was Mike's committee that wrote it that way.
That was in Congress,
No, you have a tough job ahead of you, there's no doubt. We'll discuss the potential allocation. Just for people's references, you're going to the town as well,
Yes,
asking for the same amount.
yes.
Are you going to any other towns?
No, I mean, we are St. Albans Museum, so our focus is at this time to stay within St. Albans and to keep that our focus.
Thank you for your time, Lisa, appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.
Have a good evening. Next item on the agenda is item number 6. Does anyone have public comment regarding the museum? Prior to
I
that?
just want to say real
Yes.
quick that Janet let me see it the other day, and it's really an amazing space. And you know, with with the Untold Stories coming out, I wonder if you reached out to places like Rugby, the Smithsonian, like the African American Museum, the Smithsonian African American Museum. I mean, I think there's a big chance to like team up with that, and to team up with organizations or museums like that, and get bigger, like a groundswell of support. Also, it sounds like you guys, like, there's not a grant writer. Obviously, you just have a part-time thing. So if you guys need any help with grant writing or anything, that's what I do in my professional life. So I can certainly help you out with that, and I'm also communication and events. So if you need any help with that, I'm more than happy to like help you with some kind of campaign for fundraising in the meantime. So
We have a
Yeah, what you
contract.
asked for.
We have a contract up here that Ryder can sign.
no,
Actually, no, volunteer. We'll be calling.
I'll sign my soul away for a couple months.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate the recommendations as well.
Okay, now we'll move on to charter amendment to allow the city council to appoint the city clerk. Just prepared some comments with the help of city manager. No, we need the mask if we got one. I'll just read this so I don't miss anything. Many of you are aware that our current city council, our city clerk, Curry Galloway, does not intend to seek re-election. And I would say that Curry's been an exceptional clerk, but the way it's set up now, it's difficult to determine the skill set. So in today's day and age, a city clerk and treasurer must have exceptional communication, organizational skills, the ability to manage elections and votes that inspire public confidence, and the ability to navigate complex rules and regulations and explain them to the general public in a friendly manner. The clerk and treasurer is, for many people, the face of the city. It is too important a position to limit recruitment to our 2 square miles, which is required by our charter, and to take our chances with whomever is willing to run for election. During the transition in the office, I think we should seek voter approval to change to an appointed clerk and treasurer with no residency requirement. The city recently ran a hiring process for the assistant clerk where there is no residency requirement. We received 68 applicants. There were 14 from the city and 14 from the town. We interviewed 5, 1 from the city, and 2 were from the town. We hired someone from the town. In today's recruiting environment, which we've heard about earlier tonight, we need the ability to cast a wider net and remove obstacles. We need a larger pool than 1 or 2 people who choose to run. To get that, we need to move to an appointed clerk, treasurer with no residency requirement. This would be similar to other department heads such as police, fire, and public works. What is different from our department heads is the appointment would be from the city council, not the city manager. The clerk and the treasurer position has a long tradition of independence. They do not report to the manager. We want to maintain that independence. This would not change any of the duties codified in the city charter or Vermont statutes. But I think it's time to change to an appointed clerk and treasurer who was selected by the city council without regard to residency. We owe it to our residents and get the best person possible while still retaining the independence of the office. Procedurally, this would require a vote to amend the charter in March and legislative concurrence thereafter with an implementation date of July 1. There would still be a position on the ballot in March when the candidate may choose to run. If a candidate is elected and the charter passes and is approved by the state legislature, the candidate would phase out on July 1. They could also apply to be the appointed clerk and treasurer. If no candidate applies, a vacancy occurs, and we would manage the vacancy through an interim appointment. So that is a long summary of how we got here. A couple things that when I first was elected mayor, one of the things that I was shocked at was for someone to run for city clerk or treasurer, considering that their financial responsibilities, there's no background check that is required of anyone who runs for that position. So I would say in this day and age, that's crucial when we talk about, not so much now recently, but in the past few years, the amount of embezzlement that goes on, I think is important for us to maintain that leadership and have the trust of the council. For those who don't know, the city clerk can come in and cut the hours, 4 hours a day. They can do what they want without any oversight from anyone within City Hall. So we think, and I think I speak for the entire council when I say that we think the time has come for us to change our charter and address this by appointment, keep in mind by the council, not by the city manager, and it's clerk who would answer to the council. So with that, I would see if anyone on the council has any additional comments, then we'll move to the public. There's a timeline that we'll go over in a second.
How many other towns have appointed clerk treasurers?
No, do you know the answer to that?
A rough estimate.
20-25% maybe?
20-25%?
Yeah, it's been growing. So it used to be that you had to have a charter to do so, but the legislature amended it so you just have to have a vote. And with that, they've been picking up steam. I could get some data from the league, but it's typically the larger, more professionally run towns that have it, but not all. It's Jericho just did it fairly recently. So.
How was COLAs and all that? They're obviously not a member of the union, correct?
Well, the clerk and treasurer presently enjoys all the benefits of an employee. They just don't get any management. I guess that's a benefit. Health insurance, retirement, all of that. They're not typically eligible for unemployment insurance, but all the other packages, the vacation package, the clerk treasurer's membership of the leadership team, functions for all intents and purposes as a department head. Right now, the voters choose who comes in and who goes out, but once they're elected, we just welcome them as part of the administration and build a team. But the challenge, as the mayor just laid out, is, this is a really different world than it was last time we filled this position. And as this person touches and interacts with the public a lot more than most of the rest of us do, for all intents and purposes, the face of the city.
This goes to the voters, right? I mean, we here, the council doesn't change that. That goes to the voters. And it has gone to the voters before in the past, and hopefully different circumstances, different instance, but.
It goes to the voters, so the question before the council is, should we prepare for a charter amendment process? And if you pass a motion to that effect, we would begin to draft language and calendar out the hearing process. It's a pretty lengthy hearing process. We need to press go this month for that special meeting in a week or so. by the end of the month when we launch the hearings. I know it was talked about at one point when Peter Loyer was mayor. I'm not sure it ever made it to the ballot.
Pretty sure it did.
Did it?
The names of the ballots since I've been here, I'm pretty sure.
I don't think so, Chad.
I thought it did.
I know it was not well received, but I'm not sure it made it to the ballot.
We're at a different time and a different place now.
No, I agree.
I mean,
I agree.
I really hate the title of clerk. It makes it sound like somebody on a typewriter in an office somewhere. And I go to probably more town clerks than probably everyone together in this room weekly. And that office needs to be a well-oiled machine. They do a lot. And people don't understand how much. I was amazed at her. She was able to do all that stuff and keep the personality that she had. It's hard to find people like her. I would be worried if I couldn't find people like her to fill this position. But the checks and balances of the clerk from a long time ago to make sure that the books were, the accounting was right, the checks were on budget, that the governing body wasn't doing something inappropriately. We have that within the staff now. So we don't have to have that here. There isn't that type of checks and balance anymore. So now the clerk can do a lot more other things here. And it has to be a part of the team. It's not a separate position anymore. Everyone has to be able to work together. And it's just very difficult when you have a position that looks like it's contrary to the government of the municipality, which this isn't. It should be complementary. And I think you'll find in the larger towns, it's like Dominic said, this is exactly what's going on. The smaller towns aren't there yet. Why? Because the clerk is still acting as the person who does the books and takes in the checks and all the stuff that Tom's department does within the city government, or the staff. So I think that in today's posture, which was much different when the time when you were thinking with Pete, is a lot different. And I think this is the right move for us right now.
Well, it definitely wasn't Pete, because I haven't been here that long. I don't know about that. I think it was Ryan, not Marty.
No. And it was, I know the time that you were thinking about, and I think it was when Joe Luna was on the council as well.
Yeah.
And there was a faction against that, but I think their position is probably totally different now.
I think that the other piece that
Yeah, I think it's a positive, and now it's looked at as a positive move. And it's just the charter now that weighs us down. And I'm really worried about somebody coming in who's very popular, but doesn't have the qualifications for that job. Because, like I said, that place has to be a well-oiled machine.
It doesn't have to be popular if nobody runs.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot more than just the election and reading people in that window. That clerk has a huge responsibility,
I think we were so fortunate that when Corey first ran for this position, she was so extremely qualified, but we can't, in my opinion, allow the luck of the draw to take.
We were extremely fortunate with her. We were very fortunate with her.
I mean, how many of us have gotten a complaint from the clerk's office that there was no protocol for addressing it? Right? I mean, and I'm not saying I'm sorry, but there was just nothing that this council and the city manager could do to address it. You make a comment, but there was no documentation that was going to be required for it. So this does, at least there's this body that starts with the answer to.
We really see it, the attorneys who are in the town clerk's offices really see the type of work that they do. And it's really amazing, stuff, and all the knowledge they have to have. Yeah, it's a huge position, and I'm worried about it.
Let's go to anyone in the audience have any comments? Reese?
Yeah, hi folks. So my mother-in-law is a town clerk in Vermont, so I have a little bit of a little bit of familiarity with the role, and I think the way you described it and the skill set, all of that is super spot on. That person is really, you know, the face of the area, has to have really deep knowledge, have really great customer service skills, and I think an appointed position makes sense. You know, I think as all the reasons articulated, I would fully support that as a voter. I do have concerns about that person not being from St. Albans if they, as you have all reflected, are seen as the face and the representative of this city. I also have concerns within our economic environment that we wouldn't be creating that as an employment opportunity for someone who lives in our city. And so my question, I think, is kind of a question as a comment, is really, what is the driving factor, and why would we not expect or anticipate or hope or build something in that if they get the job and they don't live here, they move here? People do that all the time for jobs, and if it's because we're not paying them enough for the skill set to do that, then maybe we should look at the salary we're paying them. I just think, to me, that seems really weird to reflect that this position is someone representative of the city, and we would not really expect that they actually live here to fulfill that function.
I think part of the discussion raised, for me anyway,
Yeah.
is that we don't expect that of any other department head.
I actually have a problem with that of any other department head. It is odd, for example, to have a chief of police not be someone living in the city that, or not be a resident of the city that they are serving. I mean, I do think that there is an angle of being a public servant that actually lives and breathes, and if you have kids, send your kids to school, be a part of that community very much in these roles. I mean, this is not just a visitor's welcome center. This is someone who needs to know the ins and outs. So that seems peculiar that person wouldn't be expected to be a St. Albans resident.
I don't 100% disagree with that. In fact, I'm on the same line.
Oh, do you agree with me too?
Yeah, I do. But I remember, Reese, remember this. There was one time in this area where you had to be from the city to be a city manager.
I think,
All right? Our city manager doesn't live in St. Albans.
why we wouldn't expect someone to move here to fill that role?
I would love that.
Right, I don't understand. To me, it feels like we're now creating employment opportunities for people who live outside of here, but we're paying their salary from people who live here. I mean, that to me just seems very...
Like maybe have a requirement that you have to move here.
Yes.
If you're gonna...
Yeah, and if that's a challenge, then have a grace period. When people are taking on new jobs, every new job I've gotten, I've moved to a new place. Now, that's not ideal, but also these are public servants.
Anyone else?
Just pragmatically, I don't disagree with what Reese is saying either, but in favor of this being a appointed position, knowing that there is work that happens that even impacts our healthcare system, right? I mean, birth and death records are huge, and when that breaks, it breaks badly for everybody, and that's just, I think, one example of many of the things that Tim was talking about. So I do think appointing this position and having it be someone who's qualified and understands all of those nuances is important, because not every elected person is going to understand that birth certificates have to be done in 24 hours, and if they're not, it's a very real problem for real people. So, one example.
Thank you. Anyone else? Online, anyone? Raise your hand. So we will, I would entertain a motion to move forward with this discussion. We have a motion from Stan, seconded by Mike. Any other questions or comments from the board? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So Don, you will continue to move the discussion forward?
Yep.
Thank you for that.
Flag one thing on that. So the idea is, so I'm going to contact the chairs of both GovOps committees in the House and the Senate and try to tee things up. So assuming that the voters agree with the direction that we're heading in March, it'll be tight. But I think Jeanette and Sarah could be amenable, but I just...
Their approval would come after town meeting day.
Yeah, so what would have to happen is that the committees would have to acquiesce to, you know, doing a bill after the drafting deadline. Like the drafting deadline for a long form bill just went by for the second year of biennium, right? So the way it would work is that we have to have the committees acquiesce, accept the bill after, crossover after the drafting deadlines, and just ran it through. And, you know, I think I can get that done, but it's gonna be tight. Just want to flag that.
Good. Any other comments? All right, let's move on to item number 7, which is consider appointments to the Development Review Board. Chip, you presented the board with, thanks for being here. So we have 2 individuals, Rebecca Pfeiffer, who is the chair, who is looking to be reappointed, as is Denny LaPointe. Denny would like to reduce his role from a full-time member to an alternate, is that correct?
Correct.
And then we do have an individual who's in the alternate seat who would like to move up to the full-time seat that would be vacated by Denny LaPointe, which would then leave us with 1 alternate seat remaining, which we have a candidate interview for tomorrow. Right? So I guess I look to you, Chip. My recommendation would be that we reappoint Rebecca to the board, reappoint Denny, and move him to the alternate seat with his approval, as we stated. Within that same motion, we move that to Denny's spot.
So moved.
Second.
And then we will do the interview tomorrow to fill the alternate seat. That works?
That's great.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? We have an interview tomorrow with Bob. You're unable to do it. Chad, you're doing it with me and... You're doing it?
Yeah, I'll be there. I do want to make one comment. Rebecca has been a fantastic chair.
Yeah, we're lucky to have her continuing on.
Good. Good news. All right, so we have a motion and a second for the positions as stated. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. So Chip, you have that layout. Good. We have before us a grant agreement resolution on number 8. That's yours as well, Chip.
We received a VCDP grant using some of the COVID recovery funds to support the work of Healthy Roots Collaborative, most of it actually retroactive last year and this year, the fiscal years. And this, like as with all VCDP grants, it has to flow through the city, but it's the Healthy Roots that would be the sub-grantee. And it's always a requirement that when the grant agreement is finally ready, the city council has to pass a resolution to accept the grant agreement.
I move we accept the VCDP grant agreement resolution as presented.
I'll second.
Second by Marie. Any questions for Chip? Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And Chip, you need our signatures on that?
Yeah, start over here with Bob. So actually, start on this side, and then I'll end up over here with you.
Yeah, so just
And then we also have a support from the Police Advisory Commission to reappoint Winnie Wilkerson and John Nichols to the advisory board for 3-year terms.
So moved.
We have a motion to reappoint Winnie and John. Is there a second?
Does Winnie and John still want to do it?
Yes. Melinda has checked in with them, is supportive of them continuing their service with the board.
Second.
So we have your motion, Chad?
My motion.
Yeah, second motion from Chad, seconded by Tim. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the appointments, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So Winnie and John are reappointed to the Police Advisory Board. Tom, we'll go to you for, Number 10, Don. Talking about, to start with, redevelopment of 100 Federal Street.
So as you know, we acquired 100 Federal Street, the so-called Jolly Lot, about a year ago. We acquired it with the intent of redeveloping it using our tax income finance funding mechanism and our redevelopment protocol, which is we acquire the land, clean the site, and then reach out to prospective developers to build something that aligns with the city's vision and policy documents. And so we're going to be bringing forth a cleanup article for town meeting day in March. We're going to be asking for, I think, $500,000 to fund the cleanup. Latest estimates are around $375, but we're a little worried about the bidding climate, given everything in the construction industry right now, and some of our professional services to bring that project to fruition. So give us a little buck, really come in at $500,000. We're fortunate that we've had enough other growth in the district that can pay for that, that can provide the increment to cover the cleanup costs. It's also a great time to be approaching state and federal agencies for cleanup funds. So I think you can reduce some of that through the different federal grants that are out there. We're working with a couple of different prospective developers at this point on that project. We'll have a little bit more information on that hopefully at the January meeting. But this is just an initial heads up to the council and the voters that we're preparing to use TIF to clean up the job lot.
Question on the old Solo Honda lot, are we getting any state funds now to clean that up? I heard there's all kinds of cleanup funds and that they may be footing almost the entire bill for that.
That's correct, yeah.
So how much is that? Like 2.5, 2.6?
All in, Fonda is $3 million. Right now, they're funding Lot 3, and we're laying the groundwork for Lots 1 and 2. So it's not 100%, and like the other day, in the work that they were doing, they discovered a footing that wasn't contaminated but still needed to be removed. So we'll cover the footing with our existing TIF funding. But I would say, the state's been covering 90% of it, in large part because it was enrolled in the BARA program a couple years ago. So they've been incredible to work with. And our redevelopment project to relocate the American Rail Dispatch Center to Lot 3 and have counter contracts and build that at least goes moving along well.
So we're going to save some money from TIF there, right? Because we had some money that's been okayed there.
Yeah, there's a TIF, there's $1 million for that. That hasn't all sugared out yet because there's some land acquisition costs that are part of that. So I don't think we're going to need our full $1 million. We're going to need, $750 of it probably.
And hopefully we get 1 or 2 covered as well.
Get 1 or 2
Covered for cleanup covered.
lots, 1 or 2. Yeah, yeah. I think we're really well positioned on cleanup. It's the land acquisition of the railroad right-of-way that's adjacent and things that fall more into site work and site prep, which is also TIF eligible, but isn't technically, cleanup, right? So, there's a lot of hand sorting between us and the agency, right? About, if dirty dirt comes out, what about the thing that was under the dirty dirt that still needs to come out, and what comes back in, and, who pays for what? But I can't give enough credit to A&R. They've been incredible.
Thank you.
Are we, is DFA on the book here or not?
No.
No, they're far from it, or?
No, they're getting there. But They're one of the folks that we're talking with. We've got some other folks that we're talking with as well. But we'll be able, I think, to easily find development interest for that lot.
It's come a long way since it was a scrapyard with two giant oil tanks and
Sure has,
everything that's
that's
going there. So,
Do you need anything from us on that?
No, that's just a heads up that we're moving the ship that direction. There's a good segue to this sheet in the packet, overview of upcoming hearings and timeline for the city budget. So we're on number 1 here at the December council meeting. We need a 60 to 70 day notice for a charter change. So around the end of the month, after the 21st, we'll send out a notice for the charter change hearings. And then there's a 15-day notice for the hearing that there's an upcoming TIF vote. We're going to try to hold that at the January meeting if we have enough information and the development deals come together succinctly enough for us to present a hearing that is adjustable. And then number 4, the first week of January, we'll get together with the Finance Committee and review the budget. The January 10th meeting, which is our regular meeting, we'll present the draft of the budget. And then from there, things get a little bit more speculative. Depending on what kind of shape the budget's in, we'll either have another meeting on the 17th and then ultimately we'll look towards signing the warning at the end of January. What I haven't layered in there is some of the additional hearings that are required for a charter amendment. And so now that that's official that we're heading that direction, we'll calendar that out and get all that lined up. But that's the rough overview at this point.
so hold on.
Could we combine those hearings, can we? Could we combine those hearings? They have to be done.
They're not mutually exclusive, but you gotta get the timing to line up, right? So if the calendar allows you, you can.
The charter's in such a long warning, is the issue, right?
Yeah, but remember, they've both got 2 warnings, 2 hearings, and so we've got the January meeting, and we've got the February meeting, and then we've got the informational session before the vote. That are kind of baked in, right? It's structural that we always do it, and we'll try to use those as the stepping stones and not schedule special ones outside of that.
Any other questions on that?
So that's that. And then following on the heels of our retreat, I've written up your goals and objectives. Any suggested amendments, additions, deletions? You can also, it's getting late, we can bring this back next meeting if folks want to do a deeper dive in any.
What's the preference, anyone? You good with it as presented, or?
I am. This is posted too, right?
Yeah.
You good? You good, Jeff?
I'm good.
All right.
Motion to approve goals and objectives 2021-22.
Second. Motion by Tim, seconded by Chad. Any other comments on that? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. Moving on, for your long-awaited, thank you for your patience. Item number 11 is consideration authorization of ARPA funds to conduct environmental assessment of property located at 14 Maple.
It is 24 Maple.
I was going to say 24.
We've touched on this previously. Staff are recommending we use $61,760 from the ARPA funds to facilitate environmental assessment work at Colony Square, which is the apartments at 24 Maple. We'll deal together to sell these, but the lack of information about the environmental cleanup costs is what's dragging the deal down. Long history of work there, and as I understand it, despite the prevalence of cleanup of brownfield money all over the place right now, there doesn't seem to be any assessment money. This project has languished despite a lot of zealous advocacy from various quarters. This is a way for us to multitude of funding line.
What was on that property before?
Oh,
What was it confusing?
it was the,
Gas and
natural
light.
gas.
It's coal gasification plant.
Interesting.
So not a big deal.
So this is something this is something we discussed last month. I'd like to thank Courtney for her interest in the property and potential for making a difference in that neighborhood. It could be huge for that area. So Courtney, thank you for that. And so with that, I would entertain a motion to approve ARPA funds to conduct the assessment of the property based on the information you have before you.
1,760, is that what it was? What was the dollar amount?
$61,760.
So moved. Is that dollar amount higher?
For a second. Motion by Chad, seconded by Mike. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes. 14.
Thank you.
We don't have a check for you tonight.
I think it goes to the BTDC anyway.
So you will coordinate with Don moving forward. So thank you for your interest in that and your efforts. I know it's been a long road and you've been patient, so thank you for that.
Thank you, and hopefully we can get it done and
Yeah.
do some much needed improvements.
Okay, let's move on to council reports number 12. Start with you, Bob, since your mask is down.
I don't think too much happened in Ward 5, so I don't have anything to report this month.
Marie?
Nothing to report, all's quiet.
Thank you, Marie. Mike?
Track parade was a blast. Things are going pretty well in Ward 4.
Yeah.
I'm good, but I would have a report, probably would be in my ward. If someone were to come up into the council and say they were going to put residential units in the museum building.
You think that's a bad idea, huh?
I think that this whole board probably thinks that's a bad idea. Everyone's been here all their lives, like most of us here, are not gonna wanna see that building in a residential unit. I think my hands were sweating when he said that.
See, the problem with this city manager is, you know, he's a development guy, and he's got a hammer and everything looks like a nail. That's the, yeah.
Other than that, nothing.
Wait, John, does your town have a museum?
Well played, Reese.
Okay, Mike, do you have anything? You good? Chad?
Just want to say, thank P.E.G. did a really good job the other day with the snow. First time, always a tough one, so they did a good job. Thanks also Marty for putting some lights in the park. He turned the one down that face south, and I think that's good. If you can turn the one down that faces north, that would be really great. And then in the fall, just ask him to point them towards the field and the one that came down. So those things are really, so it lights up the whole park. It's much appreciated. So one of my neighbors did call and said, hey, it's dark over there and there's someone in the park. And I'm like, it's 5:15, it's okay, they're using the lights on the swing. So it's good. So
You can see them.
you can see them. It's like they're there before, you just couldn't see them.
So I have a few things. Is that it, Chad?
That's it, thank you.
Kudos to the downtown lights in the parks. I know we were a little slow to get them up and running, but they look great. A lot of compliments. Thank you to all the volunteers, tractor parade, festival of trees, Volcan Jeep Parade. And this is, I think those are it, but all made possible by volunteers. I did receive a letter of resignation, which Chip, I'll give to you. Jim Smith was a longtime member of the Rail Trail Council as a city representative, and he has resigned, so we'll be looking for someone from the city to fill that spot. So if you want to pass that in.
Motion to not accept this?
Yeah, please do.
And the other one I have is more from an ordinance perspective, I think, is I have some concerns about e-bikes riding on the sidewalk. Saw one guy cruising over here, went right across the street and just about got hit at about 20 or 25 miles an hour. I've also seen him in the car cruising along at what appears to be about 25 miles an hour. I don't think the sidewalks are the place for e-bikes. I think we need to have some consideration as to how we want to handle this moving forward.
I think last summer I was concerned about people riding those bikes on the sidewalk. I recall checking it in the statutes, and I don't think, they don't have to get registered, and it's a kind of a difficult situation to monitor that, I think.
Oh, no.
But I agree with totally that they can come up behind you rather fast and could be dangerous.
You're not allowed to have bicycles on the sidewalk, period. By ordinance, right?
On Main Street.
Yeah, downtown, you're not supposed to, but I don't believe pedal bicycles are prohibited on sidewalks outside of downtown. What we prohibit, I believe, is motorized vehicles. We'll have to go back and look at what the definition of vehicles is. The issue is that they're going so fast, when they come upon a crosswalk, a motorist is not expecting something going 10 or more miles an hour to suddenly come upon you on a crosswalk. You're looking for pedestrians.
Right.
And I think the bikes are so fast, they actually put themselves in more danger if they're not in the travel lane of traffic, if they're on the sidewalk. And driveways, same thing with someone backing out of a driveway. Yeah, so we'll look at that.
Yeah, I mean, the speed that he went across White Street, the car did lock up the brakes. It was close, so. Thanks, Chip. All right, anything else, anyone? Anything extra?
Just well wishes to Jim Duffy.
Yes. Inquiry, Jim seems to be in good spirits. I saw him 2 days ago or 3 days ago. So, consider approval of meeting minutes from 11/8/21.
Motion to approve minutes 11/8/21.
Motion by Tim, second by Marie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Warrant 11/30/21.
Motion for approval of warrants.
Second.
Motion and second. Any comments or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, warrant passes for 11/30/21. Any other business? Anyone in the audience? Katie, can't believe Jeff, we're not done.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'm so glad I came tonight, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
I think we're all set, everyone? We do have an executive session upstairs that we will be going into, so we're going to go into executive session.
Move the council goes into executive session to the plan of future disclosure of contract negotiations, matter related to the appointment or evaluation of a public officer, and discussing real estate purchase options to compromise the city or persons involved.
We have a motion and a second. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ray. All those in favor say aye.
I move the council moves into executive session to discuss the above.
Second.